In this video, I'm going to show you how to add fiscal year and period columns into your date table in Power Query in Power BI. Firstly, a bit of theory. And if you get the theory, then you can use this in DAX, you can use it in Power Query, you can use it in Excel or wherever. In this spreadsheet, I've got a table, and the first column here called year. I've just listed out, I've just added 12 rows for the year 2020. I've added another column with the month's number 1 through to 12, and of course I can determine these from my date table, from my date column in my date table. The result I want is a fiscal year column and a period column, where for the first 3 months my fiscal year is 2020, and from month 4 through to 12 is 2021. This is based on a year-end month of 3, in other words March. And so for January, February, March, I want the period to be 10, 11, 12, and then restart at 1 in April and go through to 9 at the end of the year. So that's the result I want. And let's see how we get it. To get this, we need to determine a relationship between what we know, which is the date and therefore the year and the month number, and the year-end months, and our fiscal year and our period. And we can do that through a couple of indices that I call the year-month index, this YMI value here, and the year-period index, which is this YPI value. And the year-month index is simply 12 times the year plus the month number. And this gives a unique index for every single month, a unique index for every single month-year combination that increments by 1 as each month progresses. And we can do the same for the period and the fiscal year. We create a year period index, which is 12 times the fiscal year plus the period. And of course this is going to increment by 1 as we step through each month. Therefore the difference between the YMI value and the YPI value is going to be constant. And if I subtract YMI from YPI, I get 9. And that will be true when my year-end month is 3. If my year-end month is 4, that becomes 8. If it's 5, it becomes 7, and so on. In other words, actually, this YPI minus YMI value is 12 minus my year-end months. So now I have a relationship between my year period index and my YMI value, and therefore my year and my month number. So I can say my year period index is YMI plus 12 minus year end months. In other words, YMI plus 9 in this particular case. Once I have my year period index, I can calculate my fiscal year by simply dividing by 12 and getting rid of the remainder. So I divide by 12 and round down. And then my period I calculate basically by rearranging my original formula for my year period index. I now know my fiscal year, so I say my period is year period index minus 12 times the fiscal year. And I know my year period index because it is year month index plus 12 minus the year end month. Right. Without further ado, let's do this in Power Query. Here we have my date table. It's a simple 2-column date table with a date column and a relative day column. We're not going to use the relative day column in today's example, but it's just a column which has 0 for today, plus 1 for tomorrow, minus 1 for yesterday, and so on. I find it a very useful column to have in my date table. So we're going to add a column, a custom column, and we're going to build this up step by step. So first of all, we'll create the year-month index. So let's just call it YMI so we don't lose track of ourselves. And what we said was that was the 12 times the year plus the month number. So 12 times, and we use the Power Query date.year function, date.year of our date column plus our month number, which will be date.month of our date column. So that's our year month index, but actually let's take it on a step and convert that into our year period index, which is basically this value plus 12 minus the year end month, if you remember. Now we haven't got a year end month defined in our model. We could hard code it in here, but I'd rather not, because I'd rather create it as a separate query, because we can then use it throughout our model and throughout Power Query. So I'm going to do this by creating the simplest of all queries, with a blank query. And I'm going to give the query a value of 3 and call it year end month. It's rather like declaring a variable. I only want to use this query within Query Editor. I don't want to see it in my model, so I will disable the load, but it's there for me to use in Power Query. So back to our date table, and I want to change this YMI value to YPI, or year period index. Let's call it YPI. And if you remember, it was the YMI value plus 12 minus year end month. And since I've defined this as a query, I can just call it just like a variable. And that's now our year period index value. But it's not the year period index isn't what we want. Actually, what we want is the fiscal year. So let's edit it again. Let's call it fiscal year. And let's divide this value by 12. And we can see we're getting close now. What we can see is we've got the fiscal year plus a remainder, which is the fraction of the year. We don't want that, we just want the fiscal year. So to get rid of that fraction, we use the number.rounddown function in Power Query. And for our argument, we want 0 decimal places. That should give us our fiscal year. And it has. So November 2022, we want a fiscal year value of 2023. So that looks correct. Couple of bits of tidying up. I want to set this to an integer value. So actually on the command line, rather than add a new step, which I could, I'm just going to put a comma just before the last closing bracket and put int.64.type and click tick, and oops, not int dot, it's int64.type, and there's my fiscal year column. One more bit of tidying up to do. Rather than have this called added custom, I'm just going to change it to added fiscal year. So I open up advanced editor, and where this step is called added custom, I'm going to call added fiscal year in added fiscal year. And there we can see in the applied steps we've got added fiscal year. So only one more thing to do now, which is to add our period column. Now, can you remember what the formula is for this? Let's take a quick look at our spreadsheet. Our period is the year period index minus 12 times the fiscal year. So our year period index, remember, was the year month index plus 12 minus the year end month. So that's 12 times date.year, sorry, plus the month number of the date. So that's year month index. Now, to convert that into the year period index, we need to add 12 and subtract year end month. So we've got the YPI value here. Now we want to subtract 12 times the fiscal year. Minus 12 times the fiscal year. And there's our period. So November is period 8, October is period 7, and so on. Again, a couple of bits of tidying up to do. At the end of the command line, just before the last closing brackets, we do int 64.type to force it to be a whole number, and so that I can understand what I've done later on, I go into Advanced Editor and change added custom to added period in added period. And there's my new date table with the date, the fiscal year, and the period. All I need to do now is close and apply. We can go and look at our date table, and there we have it. It's February period 11. It's exactly what we are looking for.